Welcome to this legislative briefing of the Housing and Environment Revenue Opportunities Coalition. That's a mouthful, but we call it the HERO Coalition for short. I'm Lou Finfer, and I'm a community organizer with Massachusetts Communities Action Network, MCAN, which is a member of the HERO Coalition. We all know that there's a severe housing crisis across the state. There are many tens and thousands and tens of thousands who are on waiting lists for one, rent subsidy programs, two, affordable housing developments around the state, or three, public housing developments. And they're paying a huge percentage of their income for rent, in the hundreds of thousands who are in that situation. You know, there's an old joke about Boston weather. Quote, if you don't like it, wait 5 minutes and it will change. Like the day we had last month that went from 73 degrees to 25 degrees the same day. But it's no laughing matter. The climate crisis has brought us tornadoes, flooding, seacoast buildings at risk, and climate extremes. We're here today backing a bill that would raise $300 million to advance affordable housing and climate environmental needs. And we want to recognize the legislators who have filed the House bill led by Representative Elagardo, including Representatives Sabadosa, Howard, Duffy, Owens, Lewis, Barber, Capano, Gentili, Senna, Govia, Honan, Oakley, Higgins, Garbali, LaBeouf, Uterhoeven, Donahue, Ramos, Gonzalez, Santiago, Zicola, Comerford, Madaro, Holmes, Balser, Ryan, Robinson, Malia, Stanley, and Miranda. And the Senate Bill 611 filed by Senators Eldridge and Senators Comerford, DiDomenico, Lewis, Barrett, Creighton, Moore, Moran, and also Representatives Robinson, Stanley, Uterhoeven, and Patrick Lewis signed on to this bill. And of course, we invite more legislators to co-sponsor. This is not a limited club to be co-sponsored by any means. We'll briefly hear soon from the legislative sponsors and then from some leaders of the HERO Coalition. So I want to start first by introducing the Senate lead sponsor, Senator Jamie Eldridge, and thanks for leading on this bill, Senator.
Great, thank you so much, Lou. Thank you so much to the HERO Coalition. It's really just been amazing to see the HERO Coalition come together. And of course, this bill was filed last session as a late file with Representative Elagardo because I think we really saw the urgency to tackle both affordable housing and climate resiliency. And if you think HERO is a mouthful, I'll give you the full name of the bill that Representative Elagardo and I filed. An act providing for climate change adaptation, infrastructure, and affordable housing investments in the Commonwealth. And I think that really speaks to a growing recognition from environmental leaders and climate change activists and affordable housing proponents that the two are intrinsically connected. If you're talking about reducing our carbon footprint, you know, we need to have that conversation about denser housing that protects open space while making sure that residents in each one of our communities can afford to live in the community they grew up in or work or raising their families. And of course, you know, we know that the contributions of housing to global warming, to climate change, and therefore we need to tackle climate resiliency. And the reality is, and you know, so many of the coalition members know this, you know, far better than me, unless we have a dedicated revenue source, in this case, the deeds revenue fee, it's really going to be harder to tackle the affordable housing crisis and the climate crisis. I would say two of the biggest emergencies facing the Commonwealth right now. I couldn't think of a better partner in filing this bill than Representative Nika Elagardo. We obviously have different districts. I have a Metro West, mostly suburban district. She represents parts of Boston. But Representative Elagardo, Nika, has just been a champion since day one in her coming into the legislature on climate resiliency, combating climate change, and affordable housing. And I think you really saw that in some of the bills that passed last session. So really proud to file this bill with her. And I think what I would say from a perspective of my district is, you know, when we talk about the affordable housing crisis, and you hear that a lot, is what does that really mean? And I think, you know, for the district I represent, it's an increasing number of people that cannot live in the communities they grew up in, or they want to, you know, come out to the district. They're moving here for work or for school, or to raise their kids and take advantage of the public schools in the district I represent. But for young families, for working residents, especially in, you know, the service industries, and, you know, people that, you know, have sort of economic struggles, it's very, very difficult to get affordable housing. And I think that as much as many of my communities are stepping up to build affordable housing, the reality is that most of that housing is at the upper level of affordable housing. And so it's really not reachable by working class or working poor individuals. And so this bill will really dedicate $150 million to 2 housing trust funds that can really speak to true affordable housing for working families across Massachusetts. And then on the climate resiliency side, the district I represent, climate change, I would say, is probably one of the top issues that I hear from constituents. Very proud of the next generation roadmap bill we passed. But the reality is, whether you're talking about climate impacts we're already seeing, flooding, drought, heat, concerns about taking care of seniors or other vulnerable populations during different extremes of weather, or talking about infrastructure, looking to make sure that our infrastructure is adapting to the global warming that's already happening in Massachusetts. The reality is we need a dedicated revenue source to invest in communities, including through the Global Warming Trust Fund, which this bill would do. And again, would dedicate $150 million towards that purpose. And, you know, without that dedicated revenue source, a lot of the talk about, you know, investing in communities is really not going to happen. So this bill brings together climate justice advocates, affordable housing advocates, to a really powerful coalition. Really want to appreciate and express my deep appreciation to the leaders of the HERO Coalition. And again, very proud to file this bill with Representative Elagardo. And let's start having those conversations with our neighbors, our family, our constituents about the need for dedicated revenue source to combat climate change and to combat the affordable housing crisis in Massachusetts. So thanks so much, and I'd like to ask Representative Elagardo to speak now.
Thanks, Senator Eldridge, and thank you all of you for being present with us today. You know, it's tough on Zoom, but I do see a couple of my colleagues. I see Rep. Vitolo and my good friend, former chair of housing. How could you leave the committee when I got on it, Rep. Honan? But really excited to see you here, and Taylor, who we've worked with on the committee, and any other offices that I'm missing. Forgive me, I can't see your faces, but I see Pete Capano. And I'm just excited about the interest in this bill, the knowledge for how important it is. Of course, I want to thank you, Lou, not only for your introduction here and setting this up, but for your years of activism on so many important issues to the progressive movement. You know, I'm excited to be here spreading the word about the HERO bill, but it's also an honor to work with the HERO Coalition and Senator Eldridge on this critical legislation. Like Senator Eldridge, I'm inspired by the energy and the enthusiasm, the passion of the coalition, the HERO Coalition. You're heroes to me. Your action and your passion is really the true heart of a well-functioning democracy. Some people might get tired of me saying it, but our democracy isn't broken. It's young, it's growing, it's maturing. And this is how we get things done in government. With your partnership and leadership. So thank you again for working with us at such a high level and for allowing me to be a part of it. As Senator Eldridge mentioned, I'm focusing primarily on the housing aspects of the bill. It evenly splits 300 million in revenue raised between climate and housing priorities. And this decision is really essential to recognizing the interconnected importance of these two policy priorities. We can't fix one without the other. And as you all know, the housing crisis long preceded and has been exacerbated by COVID, but without significant structural action. And that means not just a temporary infusion of dollars, however large, but we need real institutionalized planning and funding for going forward. Without this kind of structural change, the crisis will continue to expand into communities of all income levels long after COVID. It's no longer, the housing crisis is no longer a poverty issue. It's an issue that most residents are struggling with. So this bill answers the need for an institutionalized source of funds, and it dedicates 150 million annually to housing priorities, which will be administered through two trust funds that have demonstrated a successful record, providing funds for affordable rental housing and homeownership. So that's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Housing Preservation and Stabilization Trust Fund. Now, the American Rescue Plan was passed by President Biden and Democratic members of Congress. It does provide rent and mortgage relief. I was recently going through the numbers with Undersecretary Maddox at the HCD, and we talked about the need for ongoing infrastructure to fill in for the high levels of demand in affordable housing that will long outlast these relief efforts. The HERO bill addresses this in a long-term way. It addresses the long-term crisis by providing not only the funding, but also a legislative direction. So that equals infrastructure. And that together creates housing opportunity for literally thousands of individuals and families each year. Over time, we will get more vaccines in our arms. Our schools, our restaurants, our museums will continue to reopen. And some of us will be better able to pay our rent and mortgages. But the housing crisis, as we have said, and as we cannot overemphasize, will not be over. Just as it pre-existed COVID, it will continue to expand after COVID until we take action. And so the action is simple enough. We have to build more affordable housing, apartments, and condos for our population. And we don't have enough production to do that. And we also don't adequately preserve the stock that we have. But when we invest more in production and preservation and in programs like tenant right to purchase or TOPA, so that renters can own the place they call home, and a number of other programs that require investment to make them work, Massachusetts will be a wonderful place to live, not just for some people, but for all people. Our communities across the Commonwealth are outstanding. It makes sense that people want to move here. People want to immigrate here. People want to stay here after college, like my husband and I did over 25 years ago. People born here often want to stay close to family and grow their families here. And it's a good thing, but only when we steward that opportunity responsibly. So this means committing to building and preserving housing for every person living in Massachusetts, young families, individuals, senior citizens, and everybody in between. And that, of course, includes very low and moderate income residents too. So this bill squarely addresses our production needs for the long term, and we need to pass the HERO bill now. I'll turn it over to the experts to teach you more about the details in the bill, and I also to answer questions you may have put in the chat box, which you can continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership, Representative Alogardo, and thank you, Senator Eldridge, for your leadership on this. In addition to the representatives that Representative Alogardo saw, Representative Vitolo and Representative Capano, I also want to recognize Representative Sally Cairns, Representative Lindsay Sabadosa, Senator Sal Di Domenico, and give another shout out to Representative Kevin Honan for his 17 years of leadership as Chair of the Housing and Urban Development Committee. Thanks, representatives, and thank you, Kevin, for your work. Before we have the speakers from the groups that you'll hear from, the Mass Alliance for HUD Tenants and 350 Mass and Chinese Progressive Association, I want to name some of the other groups that are part of this coalition: the Mass Association of CDCs, CHAPA, Raise Up Mass, Sierra Club, Mass Affordable Housing Alliance, Progressive Mass, Toxics Action Center, City Life, Boston Tenant Coalition, Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, Clean Water Action, Mass Voter Table, Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Action, Mass Smart Growth Alliance, And I'm sure there are more, but I just wanted to name some of the members of the HERO Coalition. And now we're going to hear speaking on the housing issues from Michael Kane, who's the director of the Mass Alliance for HUD Tenants. Michael has been a leader on affordable housing issues at the neighborhood, citywide, state, and federal level for more than 45 years. And we're pleased to have his leadership on the coalition and want to introduce Michael.
Great. Thank you, Lou. And thank you, Representative Eluguardo and Senator Eldridge for taking leadership in filing this bill. The Mass Alliance of HUD Tenants is a coalition of tenant groups, tenant unions that have saved in HUD and mass housing assisted developments. We've saved about 12,500 units, one building at a time since '96 as affordable housing. Our members are low-income tenants. Many of them were formerly homeless. In fact, for the last decade, most people who are able to get into public housing or Section 8 are on wait lists because they're homeless. And if they're lucky to get in, only 1 in 3 or 4 people who need housing are able to get it. Before the pandemic, there were 300,000 extremely low income households in the state. That's people making less than $32,000 a year for a family of 4. And there was a shortfall of 156,000 apartments available and affordable to those people. And of the people that are renting, 47% of all renters are paying more than 30% of their income on rent, and a quarter pay over half their income on rent. And in 2016, there were 15,000 people evicted. This is all before the pandemic. Pandemic, of course, has exposed the fault lines of race, class, and eviction as never before. And as Representative Eluguardo pointed out, there is some federal money coming, but that's just temporary. That just takes the pressure off homeowners and renters who are unable to pay. When that money is paid off and the economy more or less resumes, that original crisis is still going to be there, and there will be more people because people are going to fall through the cracks. So there's some real urgency to this, and that's what leads to displacement. There isn't enough housing available to people who are extremely poor. You see it on the streets when you walk to the State House, go through the Common, you can see the homelessness. There's a lot of hidden homelessness as well. People doubled and tripled up. A fourth of the people that are homeless in Massachusetts are actually workers. They have jobs. They just are unable to afford an apartment. For home ownership, the racial wealth gap has also been exposed by the pandemic. But before the pandemic, the net worth white households in the state was $247,000. The net worth of Black people, Black families, was $8, about enough to buy a lunch at the State House Cafe. That's just incredible. And it's one of the worst gaps in the country. So the solutions that we are supporting in the HERO the solutions are going to require a huge amount of, and the state won't be able to do it all. There may be some federal money coming, but if we can get state income streams increased, we can leverage that federal money, which is coming some will come for the environment and housing, and the state needs some resources to be able to mesh the two to build new housing that is net zero and environmentally friendly. So the HERO solutions will funnel $150 million a year into the 2 housing trust funds that Rep. Eluguardo and Senator Eldridge mentioned. And we believe that that will be enough to provide 20,000 new homes over 10 years, the money for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for production and home ownership, 20,000 over 10 years. And the subsidies needed to make those affordable for extremely low income renters like the people in our organization, that would be enough for 4,000 to 7,000 extremely low income households each year. So that's why we're excited to be part of this coalition. We need your help to get your bosses to, if they're not here, or you, if you are, to co-sponsor this legislation and help us pass it now.
Great. Thanks, Michael, for what you said and your ongoing leadership for many years. Next, we're going to have, this is the HERO Coalition Housing and Environmental Groups working together. And this has not happened enough in the past, but this relationship has been forged over the last 2 years with the groups recognizing the common interests and working together to come up with a common proposal. So I'm pleased to have next speak Cabell Eames. Cabell is the legislative and political manager for the Better Future Project, representing 350 Massachusetts, which is a very effective organization on environmental justice issues. So I'm pleased to introduce Cabell.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Hi, all. So I'm Cabell Eames from 350, and I am honored to be working with all of these groups on this incredibly important legislation. As you know, our climate crisis is worsening by the day, and similar to the housing crisis, COVID-19 has only worsened the existing climate crisis. So it's happening worldwide. It's across the country. It's here in Massachusetts. And so from the strong storms to the sea level rise that we keep hearing about that's coming, the intense heat waves, we're experiencing a drought right now that scares me as somebody who used to live in California and understands that basically a drought and wind is what causes fires. So those fires that we watch on television in horror, I am afraid are knocking on our doorstep. So, with more homes and neighborhoods that are threatened by whether it's an extreme weather event or flooding, you're going to have a 35% increase in property losses by 2051. And that's what's expected according to a report by the First Street Foundations. And so these buildings account for less than 30% of our state's carbon emissions. So while small residential housing accounts for 60%, these numbers, I feel like they matter when we're discussing how these issues intersect. Next slide. So the climate crisis, it can't wait 50 years, right? It can't even really wait 5 years. So for us to start taking action. So we need to find clean energy solutions and start preparing immediately. And we have the tools to make the difference and to tackle climate change. So when grassroots activists push for climate solutions, they're able to make a positive impact, not only in Massachusetts, but worldwide. And so, for example, the next gen roadmap bill that will become law in Massachusetts in June of this year, it calls for the state to reduce carbon emissions from the 1990 baseline by 50% by 2030. And that's a good long-term goal, right? Net zero emissions by 2050 is what we need. But in order to create change, we have got to make it here in Massachusetts ourselves. We cannot wait for federal policymakers to make these decisions. We cannot wait for federal monies. We have the tools here in Massachusetts to start making change now. And so I really applaud this coalition for coming together and modeling what climate policy can look like. And I truly hope that if you haven't co-sponsored already, that you consider doing so, because we're in a crisis. We need to think out of the box. We need to be creative. And I believe that this legislation provides one of the tools to help make sure that we have a sustainable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabell. Now to hear a little bit more about the bill, we're going to have Karen Chen speak. Karen is the director of the Chinese Progressive Association, CPA, which has stood up to prevent displacement in Chinatown for decades and decades, and stands up for workers and works on behalf of the Asian community all over Greater Boston and Massachusetts. So I'm pleased to introduce Karen Chen, the director of CPA.
Thank you, Lou. So I don't need to say more about, how important it is for us to address the housing and climate crisis. You know, we do a lot of organizing in Chinatown. And as you know, Chinatown's been impacted by influx of luxury development. People are faced with, you know, double, triple rent while their income is, you know, staggered. At the same time, Chinatown is one of the most polluted neighborhoods in the Northeast because it's surrounded by highways. And also Chinatown was built on landfill. So we're also, you know, vulnerable, you know, to flooding as well. And as, you know, most of Boston. And so we, you know, luckily with this bill, we don't really need to pick and choose which is more important. It actually addresses, you know, both issues together. And as you know, and also the advocates, you know, in the housing justice space and the climate justice space, and feel like we can come together and we will, you know, have address, you know, both issues equally. So I think that, you know, we're excited that we got so many legislators behind us. Can we move to the next slide? So, you know, so this bill, you know, will double the deed excise fee from $4.56 to $9.12. So per 1,000. So some people may be like, oh my goodness, doubling it. But, you know, currently, you know, in Massachusetts, the deed excise tax bill is still very, deed excise fee is still the lowest. And even doubling it, we're still, you know, as you can see in the next slide, that it will still be the lowest. So, you know, compared to Connecticut, Vermont, New York, and New Hampshire. And so, and also, you know, for most of us, right, in our generation, because housing costs, you know, has gone up so much, for the most part, we probably will, we're lucky to own one home, and it'll probably a one-time thing that we'll have to pay. And it will be, you know, as part of the closing costs, it probably is one of the smallest chunk of money when you are buying a home. So I don't think that, you know, when we say doubling it, you know, it's not like, you know, really an astronomical amount of money. But what we will do is actually, it will produce, you know, $300 million to, you know, affordable housing and climate justice. And in terms of the affordable housing, oh, we can go back to the next, the last slide. Yeah. So in terms of the affordable, you know, housing money, so half of it would be 150 million that would go towards Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Housing Stability Preservation Trust Fund. So it's for, you know, existing housing and also for acquisition as well. And then the other half, 150 million, will go to Global Warming Solution Trust Fund, will invest both in climate mitigation and resiliency. So, you know, so I think that, you know, we don't really link, you know, climate to housing, but we think that, you know, by increasing investment in both, we'll move towards, you know, addressing the housing and climate crisis. And I think that we can, you know, we feel like this is one of the important piece of the puzzle to accelerate energy efficiency within the affordable housing space. And we think it's a very reasonable bill, and we hope that, you know, we'll continue to get the support. And I think that, you know, Cabell and Michael and Senator Senator Eldridge and Representative Elgato had said, you know, how important and urgent this climate and housing issue is. So we hope that, you know, we can get this through and really have, you know, this as one of the long-term solutions in addressing the housing and climate crisis. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen Chen. Thank you, Cabell Eames. Thank you, Michael Kane. And again, thank you to Representative Elgato and Senator Eldridge for their leadership.